Is about inequalities. Inequalities, when you're solving for inequalities, it's pretty much almost the same steps as you solve equations, which is a slight variation. So when we talk about equations and how we solve them, all right, the main difference is for an equal or an equation, you gotta have an equal sign. For example, 6 times 3 gives us 18. That's an equation. Let me give you an inequality. 20 is less than 24. If you forget, think of Pac-Man. Pac-Man always eats the bigger number. And of course, we all know that 24 is bigger than 20. So this is an equation, and this is an inequality. Just to make sure you know the difference. But the way you solve inequalities is pretty much the same way you solve equations. Your first step is you're going to cut it right through the inequality sign. Kind of like how you cut it right through an equal sign. And just like in an equation, you want the letter by itself on this side. All right, let's pretend Y has COVID. So you want to isolate it. That means you want it by itself. You don't want it to, infect anyone else. So let's pretend 3. You want to make sure 3 is safe and sound. You don't want it to get infected. So we need to get rid of it and just have Y by itself on this side. Again, in order to get rid of a number that's with a variable, you need to do the inverse. What is inverse? It's the opposite of what the number is doing to the letter. The inverse of dividing, of course, is multiplying. And you're going to multiply by 3, since you want to get rid of 3, so you can have Y by itself. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to put right here multiplication. Multiply by 3. Again, though, if it's done to one side, it must also be done to the other. There we go. What happens then is, which I've gone over before, these two, they cancel each other out, leaving you with Y by itself. Right here, this sign, this inequality sign, you bring down, just like you would if it were an equal sign. And of course, what's 2 times 3? 6. But it's not the only thing you have to do. Now, next part is, we're going to graph this, all right, onto this number line, this inequality on here. So first, let's start off at 6. Now, if you see the equal to, that means this is going to be bubbled in. That means it could be Y I'm talking about. Y could be 6. And then you see what direction it's going as far as the pointy part of your inequality. It is going that direction. So when you're plotting your inequality on this number line, your arrow must go the same direction as well, meaning I have to go to the right. So let's do that. And there you go. I just plotted on the number line this inequality. So that means that anything that's here in red could be Y. It could be 7Y, 8, 9, 10, or even 6, because like I said, it's bubbled in. So all those are possible choices that Y could be. So Y is just not going to be one number. It could be a bunch of different type of numbers, just as long as that number is equal to 6 or higher. It just can't be anything over here on this side. Let's continue. Okay, so here's another one. Let's keep on practicing. Again, your first step with an inequality is to cut it into 2 parts, your left side and your right side. And just like we did before, you want to have the X by itself. And right now we have 3. If you have a number and a letter next to each other, that stands for multiplying. So I'm going to represent multiplying with this little dot right there. Don't confuse it with a decimal. Decimals are right on the floor. This dot was right in the middle. That represents multiplying. And just like we did before, we're going to use the inverse. That means we're going to do the opposite of what 3 is doing. Right now, 3 is multiplying x. You want to get rid of 3, so in order to do that, you have to do the opposite, which is to divide by 3. So I'm going to do that here. And remember, think of it as a scale. If anything is done to one side, it must be done to the other. When you do this, these 3's, all right, they don't necessarily cancel each other out. 3 divided by 3 stands for 1, leaving you with 1 times x, which just gives us x. You don't have to say 1x, you can just write it as x. It's the same thing. So that's how x came to be by itself. You're going to bring that down. The inequality stays the same. And of course, you're going to have 15 divided by 3. And don't forget how positive and negative numbers work when you're multiplying and dividing. A good reminder is to use tic-tac-toe in case you forget. You've all seen before how I set up tic-tac-toe, but here it is one more time. And right here we have a negative divided by a positive. So a negative divided by a positive gives you a negative answer. So negative 15 divided by positive 3 gives me negative 5. So right here, negative 5. Now it's time to plot this inequality onto my graph. So you're going to start off at 5. Now, right here, I created a donut, a gap. This is what I would be writing if I did not have the equal to symbol, but I did. If you see the equal to symbol, then this must be filled in, because it could potentially be 5. X is what I'm talking about. X could be 5. Or, if it's not 5, it has to be lower than 5. That means it has to be all these numbers, since all these numbers are smaller than 5. If you forget what direction to go to for your arrow, all you gotta do is look right here and see that it's going to your left side. All right, let's do one more. But, oh, you know what? I forgot to do something here, but let me fix it. Just give me 1 second. Let's put an X there. Okay. All right, so right here, we have another inequality. And what you want to do is put a line right through the middle, just like we did before. And this time, you have a negative 2 plus x. So again, you want to have the x by itself. So we need to get rid of negative 2. It is a negative 2. So we should be adding a positive 2 to create a 0 pair. A positive 2. When you do that, you must also do it to the other side. When you put a positive 2 right next to this negative 2, that is a 0 pair. It's 2 pairs of numbers where one's a negative and one's a positive, but when you combine them, they equal to 0. Hence the name 0 pair. So when you combine these two, you can just scratch them off because they equal to nothing anyways. They equal to 0. You bring down x, you bring down your inequality, and right here you got negative 4 plus 2. Now let's look right here. Now remember what I've been talking about when it comes to positive and negatives. Think of them as good guys and bad guys. The negative 4, since it's a negative, consider that the bad guy. And the positive 2 is a positive number, consider that the good guy. So they're essentially enemies, all right? And when it comes to enemies, or the signs being different in math, you don't add the numbers, you subtract them. So I'm going to subtract them because one's a positive, one's a negative. That's what you do when the signs are different and you combine them together. So what is 4 minus 2? It's going to give me 2. But one more thing to keep in mind. You have to also look at the number that was a bigger number, or which number had the biggest absolute value. So just pay attention to the numbers themselves and ignore the signs. Between these two numbers, what's bigger, 4 or 2? 4 is obviously bigger than 2. And the sign of that 4, which is bigger, is a negative. So whatever the number that has the biggest absolute value, whatever sign it has, must be the same sign for your answer. So my answer has to be a negative because the 4 had a bigger absolute value and it was a negative. There's my answer. Now to see which one of these matches up to my work over here. All right, so first it has to be at negative 2. So we can already eliminate B and D. They're a positive 2. Second, you got to make sure it's facing the right direction. Now also look at how both of them are from the starting point. They're both correct. Now, if I had this symbol there, then both of these, all right, would need to be bubbled in. But since I did not have the equal to, you leave it open. That creates like a bubble around that negative 2, meaning it cannot be negative 2. It has to be either bigger or smaller. Or is it going to be bigger or smaller? Well, that's where you come over here and look at this. Actually, right here, that symbol tells you it has to be bigger because it's greater. Again, if you forget what that word stands for or what that symbol stands for, there's my symbol, the same one over here. And from that symbol, you can form the letter G and then form the word greater. So X must be greater than negative 2. That means it has to be numbers that are bigger, which are all these numbers are bigger than negative 2. All these numbers are smaller than negative 2, so it cannot be A. And if you forget what direction, if that doesn't help, just look at where it's pointing as far as the pointing part of your inequality. It's pointing that direction, so mine should also be pointing the same direction. And it is. My answer is C.